So we've got a great panel here. We have a quick change of, last minute change of panelists. So some folks are, we got some illnesses and other things hitting everybody these days. So we're gonna make do with this here, but it's gonna be a bit of a fireside chat, just to have a conversation and hopefully get some engagement on this. So first, I'd like to first introduce up Jason Racevich. He's the president of the ABPA and also Wamanu Consultancy. I've got Scott Rubin from Lake Nipigon Forest Management, Jordan Hatton from DNA, Director of Economic Development. I'm going to introduce Jason first, and we're going to put a bit of a map that we're going to leave up here for a bit of context for conversation. At the end of the day, Ontario is one of the few jurisdictions globally that has a surplus wood supply. We are undercutting our forests significantly through a bunch of other, other issues with the industry, some historical downturns and other things. But the fact of the matter is, we're literally sitting on 10 plus million tons of investment opportunity throughout Ontario, including a significant amount in northwestern Ontario. Now, folks who don't know how forest is managed, we have this managed forest, or the old area of the undertaking. These are all individual licenses. The little dots are facilities. But what when you look at this map, all of the colored SFLs, which represent about 51% of the sustainable forest licenses in this province, have some form of active Indigenous engagement. So 51%, either they are managed by Indigenous communities or Indigenous-led boards, so they have active participation. The other 49%, which are the light yellow, are different management units. But so I'm going to, set the stage here for Jason to come up and talk a little bit about the map and talk about the relationship between Indigenous communities, treaties, the Crown, and investment in the forest sector, to set the stage a little bit for us. And then we'll roll in and have a bit of a conversation with Scott and Jordan about their experiences with building out new businesses in the region. So I'll pass it off to Jason.
Thanks, Chris, and great to be on the panel with some leaders in the forest sector here with Scott and Jordan. So looking forward to the discussion. What I wanted to think about, or for the group here related to the discussion in the map is the concept of how we not just innovate from the technology or looking at new investment strategies, but how we think of working in partnership related to some of the discussions this morning around Indigenous impact, reconciliation, and how we are working together in that way to hold companies and government accountable and ourselves as well. So, when I see this map and you talk about the units, I just wanted to ask the audience here, show of hands, of those that actually are active in the forest sector here. So we've got a few people that are busy in the forest sector, perhaps some that are out there as well. And I think, with the question around the direct or indirect involvement of Indigenous participation, one of the goals is to enhance or increase that participation in the forest sector. So really understanding what those interests are. And the question that I was going to ask, just for the group, for Scott or Jordan to kick off, is what do you see in the map here when you think of the area that you work in or the forest unit?
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, when I look at a map, I look at a ton of area there with not that many actual operating facilities over that much land base. Lots of communities in between without that economic development that is happening or being supplied off the forest, and a huge potential and opportunity in the future. Sorry.
I concur with Scott's comments, and I mean, one of the things I feel really fortunate to be working for one of the communities that actively manages one of the forest units, Lake Nipigon Forest specifically, and hopefully other communities have that similar opportunity, because it's very beneficial to BNA, our neighboring communities, and the region as a whole.
Thank you. The question around what do we see, will be important because it varies from individual to individual, and depending if you talk about somebody in the forest sector, somebody that's an investor, shareholder, or working within government, you'll get a question related to what are the opportunities and what's the potential for investment related to merchantable fiber and consumption. When I look at the map related to some of the lived experience of being involved in forest tenure modernization for Kanagmi Ogoki and having a trap line in the Big Pick and going out each weekend when I was young to learn about the relationship, I see 5 treaty areas. And if we ask the question that half those areas have Indigenous participation on the management or management board, who here has read one of the treaties, one of the 5 treaties in full? Show of hands. So few, and the comment of that is the intent of the treaties between the Crown and those nations that signed, 3, 5, 9, and 2 Robinsons, were to share in the management and the benefits from that land. So it might be a positive map from the perspective of those that are operating the forest tenure perspective. But when we think of treaty obligations and commitments and the legacies since 1850 for the Robinson Superior and 1905 for Treaty 9 in my community, are we really making that commitment and showcasing that from a public perspective of working on honoring the treaties? And I think clearly the answer to that with the map is no. So that is one part that I see related to, the aspects of working in the forest sector, of what we can do to encourage corporations to seek value beyond compliance. Because when you think of the regulator that industry will utilize is related to the forest management plans and the business case for a facility license. It's going to the ministry. The other important regulator as a rights holder are the communities themselves, and I think it's clear that that's an important part of the aspects of reconciliation and UNDRIP and FPIC in the corporate framework for how companies move forward. What else do we see? When I look at this, I see traditional territories of over at least 100 First Nations in the Northeast, Northwest. Those traditional territories within them will have over 100,000 Indigenous peoples, First Nations peoples, that have constitutional rights under duty to consult Section 35, but will also have Aboriginal treaty rights and individual rights. So when there's an FMP for a 10-year forest management plan that considers the long-term 7-generation principle of communities, are these values that the communities have and those considerations really being considered a part of the business case for the facility license and the long-term forest management plan? That's an important part as kind of what working with communities, that's the layer of the map that the community members bring forward, is those traditional values, cultural values. So if we also think of that area, how many cultural values are probably in that map? Probably hundreds of thousands of First Nations cultural values that need to be considered and protected related to industry. And where we're going now related to also planning processes, and some of our discussions have been how are industries considering communities related to their economic development plans, land use plans, their additions to reserve, their treaty land entitlement related to what they're proposing for specific development, and how is that being considered related to an industry operation. We haven't had those discussions before, but it's pretty clear with over 300 court case victories across Canada in the last 30 years that there's a strong position for rights holder perspective in that way. When I think of from the province's role with the Crown Forest Sustainability Act and Forest Tenure Modernization Act, we have to really think about what the opportunities are within the 20-year wood supply commitments, and we see them in fine print at the end of those agreements that there's a requirement for the license holder for those agreements to engage with the communities for economic development. And is that really happening in, some of these units? It's questionable that there's better opportunities in some where there's management, some of the leadership that's been working well across those units. But if we look at half of these units, they don't have Indigenous participation in the management or in direct involvement. So it's very little opportunity for some of the discussions on the long-term planning. From an ESG perspective, I think there's some trends that we have to also think about when we're talking about sustainability and responsible business development, and that there's some opportunities for companies to leverage that related to how they could improve their position and reputation. From the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board, released on December 20, 2024, a few weeks ago, new requirements for financial or non-financial disclosures related to public companies that are operating in Canada. And the federal government is also opening up the Federal Corporation Act for private companies. So this, from an ESG perspective, is going to require companies to disclose non-financial information on climate-related disclosures. How are companies utilizing their natural assets when they're operating within these areas? How are they using water or impacting water? How are they impacting air, greenhouse gas emissions? And from a governance perspective, their ethics, both from an internal perspective and board management perspective. What are their ethics around their management and their operations from an internal audit and external audit perspective? There's going to be a scorecard based off of that, and that will impact the access to capital for companies when they're operating in these areas. I raise the importance of this because it is going to be a requirement not just for the accounting preparers of those statements, but the role that C-suite and boards of the sector that need to work on some of the partnership aspects with reconciliation and the value, part of that. The S pillar of ESG on the social impact needs to be improved, and that's an important part of reconciliation, but Indigenous people's roles in the environmental part, the governance part as far as ethics, and the social impact part is going to be a part of how a company could better collect that data and report on it. There's a 2-year voluntary period, and once it goes into the assurance world, in 2027, 2028, it will become mandatory. Further, there's communities that could make that a requirement for impact benefit agreements now, and then make that a requirement to measure over the lifetime of their project. So with what the questions around that we see in the accounting field is, from a finance perspective, is that there's companies that have blind spots related to this, and part and parcel is because of the regulator not requiring it at this point, but now it's moving forward from a standards perspective, and it will create more risk if companies don't move forward and deal with it now. So some of the assets are going to be at risk, and there could be some new liabilities that could be created if not dealing with these blind spots. But there's more of an opportunity, not just from risk management, from a value creation perspective, not just doing the right thing, but making an authentic move for reconciliation that includes these disclosures around Indigenous relations and reconciliation, and also considering what that could do for brand reputation, for what that could do for access to capital when companies are going for their increasing their weighted average cost of capital, de-risking projects, really important to get into the partnership aspect. And on a final note related to that, we see across certain areas these settlements, and I mentioned opportunities to work in harmonization with community plans. There's an opportunity for communities to invest into projects. Now, we've got a $5 billion national loan guarantee program where communities could participate in some of these sectors where they couldn't before. So that has just opened up, and it's an opportunity. If there's opportunities across these units for nations to play a lead role, rather than all those dollars going out west for pipeline equity participation in other aspects, Northern Ontario could make a position to have more involvement from an equity perspective. There's settlements related to, we're seeing a lot around the Robinson settlements and opportunities for the nations to invest through their own funds. And if we had to make a suggestion to the Ontario Finance Authority, it's to open up the loan guarantee program provincially to invest in other sectors like forestry. So just wanted to set the tone for the panel. Thanks, Chris, for the opportunity.
Thanks, Jason. No, this is, so Scott, for those who aren't familiar, so given where the show of hands, there's only a handful of folks in the audience who might be familiar with or in the forest industry space. Talk a little bit about Lake Nipigon management and the forests that you manage and well, just talk about the dark blue spot to the east of Lake Nipigon that you're responsible for management of. So give a little history about where it was maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago to where it is today. You know, just from management type to as it's currently, what's the current structure today? Yeah, start with that.
Yeah, sounds good. So Lake Nipigon hi, I'm Scott Rubin, sorry. CEO for Lake Nipigon Forest Management Inc. Have one of the best jobs in the world there doing it. Yeah, so Lake Nipigon Forest Management manages this forest right here, the Lake Nipigon Forest, roughly 1 million hectares of forest, allowable cut of wood air, like a volume we're allowed to cut per year is roughly 800,000 cubic meters of total merchantable volume, plus additional volumes of branches, like logs that have crooks, rot, that sort of stuff. It is a single entity sustainable forest license, meaning there is one company that owns and manages it, and that is Lake Nipigon Forest Management Inc., which is owned by the 4 First Nations that reside on the forest land base. It was actually started up in the past as multiple forests owned by Abitibi, Domtar, and Crown units that all merged over time. And coming into the last recession in 2008, you had this co-op SFL model that was put in place. So half the board was made up of harvesters, or half the company owned by harvesters, and half the company was owned by the facilities that took wood. That recession hit Lake Nipigon pretty hard, and as you can see, there's no mills located like directly on that forest, and that's because everyone went either bankrupt, receivership, closed down, as well as the largest harvester on the forest went into receivership at the same time. Out of that sort of process, the 4 communities that were harvesters and a minority shareholder on the unit actually supported managing the forest and running it off band funds. They kind of kept the whole forest in a survival mode at that time. And that kind of progressed. Am I on the right path there? Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, that kind of progressed over time, where at first it was just the management and not very much activity. So I started a little over a decade there, and we were cutting 50,000 meters a year. Over time, it's built that up. So we're now the forest in Northwest Ontario moving and delivering the most wood. So 700,000 meters, or in truckloads, that's a little over 15,000 truckloads a year now, which has been a huge increase over time. It was also where all the harvest was contracted out through overlapping licenses in the past. Slowly it has been building capacity internally, where half the volume is cut by direct harvesters and delivered by direct harvesters, and half is cut and harvested by, well, a partner and big supporter there for Resolute, or Domtar now, as it's changed over time. Part in it, as well as we try and progress over time, is we have no hardwood market. So right now, although Resolute or Thunder Bay is our biggest market for SPF, we are shipping right across the province to try and find markets for hardwood. And so that is kind of what we saw as one of our big opportunities moving forward.
Thanks, Scott. So you want to just take it to the next step there. You've taken a fairly, I'd say a bold step of creating an industrial park in a non-traditional spot. Herkit. Talk a little bit about how did you get there? What was how did you get to building this industrial park and landing your first big tenant, right? And and tie that back to a little bit to the business relationship within the communities that are the shareholders of the license. I'm not taking away from Jordan yet. We got to make sure, don't take all of Jordan's.
For sure.
So, yeah. So to maybe just focus on the relationship with Char Technologies, the industrial park. How did you get there? How did that happen? And what do you expect the benefits to be for the forest and the communities?
Sounds good. That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
In some ways. Kind of as we went back, so saying we have a really strong market for sawlogs that had going also to Nikina as well and those items. As you look at hardwood, the market is very limited, and poplar, birch, other than used as firewood and those items, doesn't have very much value in our area as something to market and promote business as the current state. That led us to go and look at what resources do we have out there, how much volume is achievable, and how could we find somebody that would not only use it, but provide benefit through locking in partnerships right from the community member level down to that, to partake in the revenue from the manufacturing as well, and also help stabilize our harvest operations and forest management on the forest. So that's where we started. We kind of stole something from the mining sector and junior miners, where they're very good. If they find a speck of gold in a site, they go and they can sell that speck to everybody and anyone. So we made a fact sheet up, and we went right across Canada and the US, trying to find people that could actually utilize wood and make different products out of it that would be interested in partnering and investing. So we did look at different options like OSB, so your chipboard and those sorts of plants, as well as a bunch of few different groups that said they could produce natural gas from wood, and ones to make oil and diesel. Some were well along on their technology readiness level, but then there was also lots that, I'd hate to say, were kind of like snake salesmen. So yeah, it took a lot of looking into their technology to figure out who was real and who wasn't. We did proceed through feasibility with quite a few partners. That landed us with Char, that's out of Southern Ontario, and it was nice. We were able to take some of the shareholder communities into the plant and actually see it running and operating. And it's producing synthetic coal to replace coal coming from out west into the steel industry, as well as to make renewable natural gas kind of at the same time, and have two revenue series coming into it. And so that partnership, we've moved into 51% ownership by the 4 communities to actually own that, which is all in regulated markets, which really helps stabilize our revenue stream coming in the backside, 49% Char Technologies. And then building a yard at Herkit, and this kind of it's a big glorified merchandising yard. So what that is, taking all the trees out of a stand in there and processing to find value. How we can look at still supporting traditional sawmills and pulp and paper by making sure those products go there, but pulling all the volume out of the forest stand where, other than your wildlife trees and those requirements, so you're cleaning the forest where you go, you're not having the same level of slash located in those, as well as opening up your canopy. This forest is based around fire dynamics. Well, it likes to be opened up. It grows way better that way. We're kind of working with that and bringing that side in as well. Sorry.
Thanks, Scott. It's good. All right, we'll move on to Jordan. So related, Jordan, talk a little bit about the work you've been doing with your community, specifically Papassé, and the sort of that anchor of the forest sector. Talk a little bit about the work you've been doing and the history there. So there's a long history of Sandpoint and the relationship there, and maybe figure out why your facility's not on that map. But we can talk to the government of Ontario about that, because it's their map, not mine.
Well, thanks very much, Chris. Yeah, just introduce myself. My name's Jordan Haddon, the Director of Economic Development with Bingwini Anishinaabe, Sandpoint First Nation. I'm non-Indigenous myself, but I've had the privilege of working for BNA now for about 14 years, and it's been a heck of a ride. So the BNA has a pretty bad history. I'm sure other people have seen me speak before. I always just mention this quickly. We don't like to dwell on it, but it's important to mention it. There was a community residing at Sandpoint, which is on the southeast shores of Lake Nipigon, right in the heart of the Lake Nipigon Forest. And that community was displaced first through a series of floods, and then finally with the creation of the Lake Nipigon Park back in the 1950s, which drove the remaining Sandpoint members out of their community. So fighting hard, they got the land back in 2010, and basically myself, my team, with all the chiefs that have progressed since, have been working very, very hard to rebuild that community, redevelop it for the return of the members. So one of the things that we did back in 2008, just a little bit before my time, was the development of the creation of Papassay Management Corporation, which is an economic development arm of Sandpoint, 100% owned by the community. But it's really important when you're doing business that you separate business from politics, and we wanted to make sure and start off on the right foot. And one of the first developments at Sandpoint was the creation of an industrial park and the building of a sawmill, which is run by one of our subsidiary companies, Papassay Value Added Wood Products. And Arc Ledoux is at the back. He's the sawmill manager, and we do have a booth around the corner if anyone wants to go take a look. So right now we're just cutting green lumber. We've been working for quite some time to advance to value added, but we've run into a few snags along the way. We're getting through them. But our vision is to rebuild Sandpoint utilizing the lumber from the Lake Nipigon Forest that Papassay is the shareholder of with our neighboring communities, 3 communities. And to build the homes in the community utilizing value-added lumber and hiring members directly and creating an economy that way, right? So that's our vision, and we keep working towards that, myself, my team, and our leadership. But definitely one of the bright spots, just to go back to forestry, is definitely the forest sector. Scott and his team at Lake Nipigon Forest Management Inc., in which Papassay is a 25% shareholder. So we're very, very proud of the forest unit and what we've managed to accomplish to date.
Thanks, Jordan. So this is the industrial park was sort of your anchor, right? It's your foundation. Can you talk a little bit about the additional businesses that you've been able to create as a result of that, that core business, which is the industrial park, and then tie it back to, additional economic benefits you've seen, new business, new startups, new investments that kind of as a result of making that initial investment?
No, appreciate that question. The industrial park is, it's really important when you're developing, especially when you have the opportunity to develop from scratch, as terrible as the history is, that does provide an opportunity to do things right. So proper zoning of our developments is really important. So the industrial park is located right along Highway 11. Anyone heading to Beardmore will drive right by the sawmill and all the lumber there. The industrial park has 3 surveyed lots. Lot A is where the sawmill is located, as well as location of our value-added line once that comes into play. And we're hoping that Lot B is potentially going to host a camp for future mining operations, which are very, very proximate to Sandpoint in the region. Some issues right now with lithium prices, some other things, but we're hoping that those get off the ground soon and providing those additional opportunities. Lot C, actually right now we're developing a non-reserve aggregate pit right now, which is going to service both BNA's development as well as sales to outside third parties and highway contractors. So if you can properly locate your park and then leverage those opportunities, that's critical. I'll also mention that Bingwini has a land code under the First Nation land management process. So that allows the community to lease out parcels of land to third parties through a proper leasing arrangement and bringing in additional revenues to the community. So just encourage any communities that are interested in that process to proceed with it, because it really does, it gets the Department of Indigenous Affairs out of the way and allows the community to proceed at its own pace for its own developments.
Thanks. You touched on it a little bit. Can you discuss a little bit about partnering and working with the management unit there? I mean, obviously you're a shareholder in it as well, but there is maybe between Scott and Jordan, you can just talk about maybe that relationship, that symbiotic relationship. I mean, how much is your economic development or community strategic plans, economic directions? How does that link back to the importance of it linking back to the management of the forest and business decisions? Yes, you're shareholders in politics and business, but it is ultimately the community engagement, community participation. Second part of that is has that accelerated or sped up some of your investment decisions or funding, or has it helped out with move things quicker as a result of that?
Yeah, well, I can start and then pass it over to Scott. Definitely having direct control over the Lake Nipigon Forest has been a huge benefit, not only to BNA, but our neighboring communities, AZA, BZA, and Red Rock Indian Band. So the 4 communities collectively and equally manage the forest. So obviously there's revenues that come back to the communities, which is critical to Sandpoint. Whenever we're forming partnerships, people always say, what's the most important thing you're looking at? It's revenue generation. We're trying to rebuild a community from scratch. Most of the people are working in Thunder Bay. You know, employment's not our number one issue, it's revenue, right? So, and the slow pace of government investments in the community. So obviously having a direct stake in Lake Nipigon is critical. Also, it helps with the concerns that members have regarding forestry activities. So one quick example is we started a spray committee, for example, several years ago, where we are planning to completely eliminate herbicide spraying from the Lake Nipigon forest through incremental, every 5 years, 25% reduction. So we're almost at zero right now. So it's that sort of thing when you have management of the forest and members have a direct stake in how it operates, you can accomplish a lot, both from a value side and from economic revenue generation side. But, you know, that's discussed.
Yeah, for sure. With me, I find it's a big item is like on the cultural level, it's around moose for at least our experience. And everything we do from layout of harvest blocks, species getting cut all the way to your renewal treatments, which does go into like your spray and those items. It's about how do you support increased moose population and access to it. And that's kind of the vision we look at for it. But then kind of coming back on the backside, it's also looking at the whole value stream for employment jobs and people to make career within the land base as well. And so we've been able to we're now doing 100% of the tree plant internally through either Four Nations Forestry or BZ Day Forestry Resources Inc., which is wholly owned, community-owned economic development companies. And then it's moving into the harvesting. So where it was a small portion, it's been slowly growing over time, site prep, and kind of the whole wide range of items. And if individuals can have guaranteed employment for like living at home on reserve for the course of their life, and they're not having the fluctuation of temporary jobs, and we can figure that side out, that's where it kind of hits at more of a ground-based level, which is a hard balance to hit.
Jason, Jason, do you have any thoughts on that? I got another question about investment readiness, but do you have any further? You've been involved with the Agoki and other forests up in that part of the world. Do you have anything else to add to what they're talking about, your experience in this?
Well, I think it's a clear example that when the community is engaged and part of the planning process as early as possible, related to what has been done in the past around setting up the consultation for these 10-year FMPs for enhancing that participation, it's going to require the communities to have a bigger role and the type of license. If looking at the map, the dark ones seem to be the dark purples there. It looks like, what is that, like Nipigon and Pekachikums, SFLs, and the red is the Goki there on the EFRL. So some of the other units could, I guess when we take a look at how those benefits are distributed, it's clear that there's more opportunity from a socioeconomic perspective to have the communities participate and harmonize that process. When I mentioned earlier on the aspect of sustainability, it's UNDRIP and FPIC that is going to be part of the conversation on consent-based agreements, and also how we're moving towards FPIC in the capital markets and in the investment world from a company perspective. So they're clearly demonstrating the value around that, but still facing some of the traditional hurdles related to this the system that's been put in place, and trying to work as hard as possible to make it work with industry, government, and investors. So kudos on a lot of the work that's been going on, hard work over the years to get things where they're at, and much more to do, but shining example for what we could do in Northwestern Ontario for sure.
So just a little bit on the investment side of things. When we talk about 10 million, let's say tons or 10 million cubic meters or whatever the number, it's a lot. It's a lot of wood in this province, and this is the whole province, right? This is the area they undertake in managed forest or whatever. I mean, when you look at that volume, that's a $10 billion investment. I mean, basically, a million cubic meters is $1 billion, right? I mean, if you were going to do a major new capital investment. So you got to have markets and all the other good stuff for it. But where I'm going with this is, and Jason, we've had this conversation around attraction of capital and some examples I think you used from Western Canada and other parts of Canada where there's been strong Indigenous participation in the business case and the ability to attract capital quicker than non-Indigenous, or projects that don't have direct Indigenous engagement. Can you speak a little bit about the value of, from the investor perspective and investment readiness, maybe how the investment community views having a project that has strong Indigenous engagement, participation, or stakeholder?
Sure. The part on the responsible investment and the part of sustainable finance and how that is being sourced with investors related to projects with communities. Investors and shareholders are asking for these disclosures on Indigenous relations and reconciliation, and the Standards Board is going to make that a standard for industry, as mentioned earlier. But what it's done is it's allowed investors to have a better idea of what the status is of their projects. You've got disclosures that have mainly been financial over the years, and now there's a demand for better data on that, and also a perception perspective from those communities that are directly impacted from a rights perspective. Talked a little bit about that from a human rights, Indigenous rights, but this is where the company has a chance to really dive deeper and seek value from reconciliation, including on the procurement, part of these agreements, and how there could be more of a social impact for working in a region related to that investment. So out west, we've seen communities like in BC, they've got an UNDRIP as part of the legislation, still going through the courts related to how it could be applied. But there's some companies that have seen value beyond compliance, of going beyond the duty to consult to consider recitals in their agreements. I remember in the Ogoki, we made that a recital, and that was supported. So that's 10 years ago. That wasn't required by the ministry at the time. It was just the right thing to do for the right partner that the communities wanted to support. What that does is de-risk and support some of the faster timelines related to development, related to communities being in a better position and de-risking the project. Just on a note on the regulations, I think specifically for certain projects in BC, they looked at $38 billion as the cost of some of the issues related to timelines and regulation that are being streamlined or better improved related to UNDRIP and FPIC being a part of corporate strategy and then also the government legislation.
Thanks, Jason. I think before we maybe go on to some Q&A, so maybe just a couple quick final questions. Start with Scott, and the same question for everybody. Do you have any lessons learned, kind of key learnings that you want to share with the group, particularly within the framework of the lens of folks who might want to start being involved in the forest product sector, or working within communities, or working within this space? Any kind of advice or quick, what's a lesson learned as far as what you've seen that has helped to get you to where you are today, or where Lake Nipigon is today?
Probably listening to what the desires are. It's hard to keep everyone super happy on it, but it's the more you listen and learn from what everyone's values are and goals are moving forward, it makes projects actually grow legs and move forward. And then also time kills projects. So it's about being very aggressive on your strategies to move forward. If you hit a hurdle, have always contingency plans, and kind of moving forward like that.
Well, collaboration.
Absolutely. And that's with listening and pulling everyone in. And it's that water raises all boats. So if you can go and help everybody do better in an area, everyone else is going to support each other and move it up. And it's a hard concept sometimes to get moving and rolling in different times, but that is how you not only increase the value to everyone, cost savings on the economic side, but also all the social benefits.
Jordan, you've been, I mean, 2008, we started this, restarted this. I mean, I was probably involved with it in 2010, I think, at some point as well, right? But it's 2025, so it's a long road, but successful, we think. But what's your advice? What advice would you give to the world there?
No, it's a great question. It's a great question, and I think it's, I would put that in a couple different pieces of advice. First of all, having the right, I'm going to stick to forestry, actually. Having the right management company is really, really important. So my hat, well, not my hat, but hats off to Scott and his forest team at Lake Nipigon. And they're just doing an incredible job because communities have a million things to do. It's not like, you know, my job is not to just do forestry. It's forestry and mining and hydroelectric funds, all the community developments we're doing. So having really good, strong people at the top of your managing your unit is really critical, right? So I'd say that's one really important thing. Another piece of advice I really want to pass on is the importance of First Nation control over these forestry units. Several years ago, the Ministry of Natural Resources tried to convince, and again, we had our backs up against the wall. We were losing money every year, obviously, because the forestry sector collapsed. And they tried to change the management structure to an ESFL, an Enhanced Sustainable Forest License structure. And you know, BNA, along with our neighboring communities, said no, we're not doing that. And there's, you know, that really upset the ministry at the time, but we knew that losing that control and bringing industry back onto that board would not be favorable to the communities. And obviously now we're pursuing new, very cool opportunities in the forest now with the Herca site and everything that we would not be able to do if we did not maintain that control. So that's another one. And just the third one I want to mention is just the importance of finding those access to capital streams. So over the years, that's really improved for communities at a community level. So BNA, for example, is a member of, has its financial administration law through the FMB, the Financial Management Board. And now we're borrowers with the First Nation Finance Authority, which has lower, more favorable interest rates for communities. And they work directly with communities to borrow larger sums of money. So going through those processes will open up doors for communities, and so if you have those opportunities, definitely take them.
Thanks. Jason, any thoughts? What would your advice be?
Well, I think with the study results this morning, when we looked at the impact of Indigenous impact on just the city, metropolitan Thunder Bay, 1.5 billion. But when we look at still the gap on the education or employment side of things and Indigenous spend related to supporting Indigenous business, if we put that lens onto this map in the forest sector, we've got, when we hear about opportunities and back to the treaty conversation of sharing management and decision-making of those lands and benefits that come from those lands, the Crown's just started the discussion on 45% stumpage on some communities, but that is not the be-all, end-all the conversation. When we see 90% unemployment rates in communities, when we look at workforce development and opportunities, there's many people from the communities that would prefer to work in this sector because they grew up and lived in the forest all their life and would support that type of career navigation if they're presented those opportunities. On the other front, from the business perspective, huge potential from a reconciliation driver to close the gap on Indigenous spend by considering the procurement opportunities for companies that are operating here and considering opening up that discussion with some of the rights holders and impacted nations that want to play a role, leading and driving some of those discussions on the economic development front.
Yep.
Just one more real quick one I want to mention. Work together with your neighbors. You cannot manage a unit, a million-hectare forest unit on your own. There's 4 First Nations that are within the boundaries of that forest unit. So we work very, very well with our neighboring communities at an equal level, and that's really, really important. And so I find communities that are able to do that and collaborate with their neighbors, Chris, you mentioned it just goes a long way, and you'll move your projects a lot faster and a lot further.